Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. I'm Ajay Shamdasani. Before we begin today's podcast, please subscribe to our site, hkufintech.com, to keep abreast of developments at Regulatory Ramblings and other things going on our page. Our podcast is a joint production of the RegTech Lab, HKU Standard Chartered FinTech Academy, and the HKU edX Professional Certificate in FinTech. Our guest today is a former colleague of mine. She's the APAC director of my compliance office, a conflicts of interest management solutions provider. Prior to that time, she was the APAC director of regulatory intelligence and compliance learning at Thomson Reuters, where I met her. And she's originally from New Zealand. So with that, I turn over to Ann McHugh. Good to see you again. It's been a while.
Hi, Ajay. It's fantastic. Great to be here.
Yeah, likewise. So, you've done different things. In the compliance space, but there's always been an entrepreneurial bent to it. If we can go back a little further in time, you grew up in New Zealand. What was that like, and how did that lead you to Hong Kong and ultimately Singapore?
Yeah, it's nice sometimes to go back and have a think about, how did I end up in Singapore? These things often, I wouldn't say I was a planner of my life.
No common scheme, plan, or purpose.
But yes, I am a Kiwi. Some people might say I sound a little British. That means I probably didn't live south enough in New Zealand. But yeah, I left New Zealand about 14 years ago now, and I would definitely still call New Zealand home. I was educated there. I was educated at the University of Auckland, and I did 4 years in accounting and information systems. And again, I was thinking about this today, and it's interesting because I actually had a mentor at the time who really encouraged me to do something related to IT, as in, what should I do with accounting, which I always felt like I wanted to do. Yeah. And she said to me, you know what, with where things are going, you should get into information technology. And so I did. And so, yeah, from there, I guess after I finished my degree, I joined Deloitte as part of the summer internship and graduate program in Auckland. And unlike many of my colleagues, I ended up in internal audit and IT controls straight from the get-go. And, that was interesting in and of itself. I learned a lot about computer systems and controls from a compliance perspective, controls testing. And so, what happened? How did I end up out of New Zealand? I guess circumstances led me to request a transfer in mid-2008. Which was challenging, I guess, considering everything that 2008 brought with it. Yeah. And I ended up at Deloitte in Sydney. And so I worked in Deloitte Sydney, Canberra, and Brisbane, again in IT audit and controls. And, that was great. I left Deloitte to continue that after I finished my chartered accountancy and joined a university and worked actually at the university, Queensland University of Technology, for 2 years in their internal audit department, which was a completely different change in pace. I worked under a really great female leader within the IT audit or the internal audit department there, and gained a lot of experience of working with your clients day in, day out within the university. But again, wanted a bit of a change. I guess you could say, Ajay, that I didn't want to stay in IT audit for a long time.
Sounds like it. And I don't know if it's too early to mention this, but being a woman accounting for the longest time has been male dominated. Obviously I've seen changes since I came back in 2006. There has been progress in the profession. And if you look around the big four around town, you will see many prominent women leading practices and advisory groups at those firms. So
I think there's a big talent crunch, right? And so a lot of these firms have had to come up with new policies and have probably been leading the way in the industry from this talent crunch to compete against large corporates, multinationals, right? And so they've had to come up with new policies and procedures to cater for women leaders in their organization. And they've really driven that change. I mean, Deloitte for the longest time was actually led by a woman, right, in Australia. It's fantastic to see that and to look up to that. I was very
And she was
lucky
in that
role.
position for a while, I recall.
Yeah, it Cindy. I think she was.
Yeah.
She'd moved up through the internal audit with the audit and assurance group and led the group. And I think she's now leading America or something similar. And those firms had to come up with practices and procedures to allow for part-time work, for part-time directors, part-time partners, because that transition of being a mum is challenging, right? And I think they've done a very good job of doing that. I mean, I'll answer a little bit more on that later. I guess how did I end up in Singapore?
How did you end up in Singapore?
Yeah, I mean, so I wanted to leave audit and accounting.
Right.
But I was being pitched internal audit software at my job at the university, interestingly. And I said, you know what, I could do that. I understand the industry. I've been there. I've been working in it. I really love presenting and talking. And so I applied for a couple of roles at Thomson Reuters. Again, a combination of consulting experience and presentation skills. And I got my first job at Thomson Reuters in Sydney. And loved it, really. I was working in sales, selling to risk, compliance, and audit teams. I understood what they were talking about from all of my work that I had done, which I think set me apart. And the rest is history. Thomson Reuters had a role to manage our regulatory intelligence business across APAC. And I said, yeah, sure, I'll move to Hong Kong. And so I ended up in Hong Kong. My husband joined me 6 months later and worked there for three years. I guess that's how I got to know you really well from managing that regulatory intelligence and compliance learning business in APAC. And
yeah, it's memorable times. It was a interesting age, that period of time.
Yeah, I really loved that product. And I'd been selling software for a while at Thomson Reuters, and one of those partner solutions was my now company, My Compliance Office. We had been selling that in Asia Pacific under the Thomson Reuters umbrella. And Brian Fahy, the CEO of My Compliance Office, said, I think we're ready to invest in Asia Pacific. Would you be interested in starting the APAC team? And I said, yes. I said, can I stay in Hong Kong? And he said, no. And so I moved to Singapore, which I guess, considering the challenges Hong Kong's had through COVID, it hasn't been the worst move in the world. So we settled down here in Singapore just over 3 years ago, and that's how I ended up here.
But yeah, tell us about that. I mean, tell us about the conflicts of interest management solutions that My Compliance offers. I mean, in terms of what you do now. I mean, all of it's related. I mean, an accounting background is, I think, I had a professor who was a tax professor, and he had a law degree and an accounting credential. And by far, I mean, he said he got more respect for his accounting background than the law degree, because, and you will find people with both credentials, but rarely will you find someone who is at the top of their game in both.
I think they're quite different, right? One in numbers, one in reading text. I mean, I did do commercial law at university and whatnot, but I definitely could not have made it as a lawyer. I think my brain wasn't made up for that.
Because I found accountants explain the law more coherently than lawyers, because they have to deal with implementation.
It's probably true. Probably that's probably fair. We can simplify it, maybe break it down. I don't know. So I mean, in terms of my accounting background, I actually didn't maintain my membership with the Chartered Accountancy because I just wasn't working in it. And I do regret that. That's one thing that I definitely regret. So if anyone's out there listening and they're studying accounting or law, just pay the membership fees, do the CPD.
Could you reactivate?
Don't be me.
Could you reactivate?
I'd have to go and redo it again. I tried at the time, like not that long after I'd broken it, and they wanted me to do all sorts, more papers, more study, paid thousands of thousands, and I was just like, okay, it's fine. So maybe I'll slow down at one point and I'll go back and do it. We'll see.
Might as well just keep paying, because in some U.S. jurisdictions for your bar license for the legal profession, if you choose to go inactive, you choose to reactivate at a later date, you are on the hook for all of those years you were inactive at the current rate.
Yeah, exactly. And I was like, no, I'm good. And so I'll go back one day if I feel like I need to do it, I guess.
So my complaint, MCO, yeah, MCO.
What does MCO do? My compliance office, from a conflicts of interest space. So, my compliance office has been around since around 2008. Actually, our CEO took the company private out of Fidelity Investments, and so again, challenging time this 2008. He kind of went to market. They had a solution which was very focused on compliance task management. So, all of the monthly, daily activities you need to complete, attestations and certifications. And he went to market, and really what the market was saying off the back of the 2008 crisis was, we need something for managing personal account dealing. There's new regulatory controls and measures in place. We need something that's going to help to automate that. And so really that's where the beginning of what's now my compliance office started. It was around that conflict of interest, insider dealing risk off the back of the financial crisis. And so we started as a personal account dealing platform and have grown with his vision. So we have it's a single integrated platform. So you're not buying multiple different systems. It's one platform, all integrated together. It's really what we call it. We have 4 different modules, but one big area that we sell is know your employees. So all of your employees get access to the system. You're all doing your attestations, certifications, and declarations that you need to do. Do you have an outside business activity? Are you moonlighting on the side? Do you have close personal relationships with any politically exposed individuals or other staff members in the firm that could create a conflict of interest? And so our solution is built around this. It's around identifying potential conflicts of interest between the employee and the firm. That's where we started. And I'd say we've grown quite a lot over the last 2 years or 3 years since, COVID. We grew 63% in Asia, and I think over 200% in Australia, in my region. So a lot of growth, and a lot of that's come from actually firms moving away from legacy technology for managing their control room. Thinking about transactional conflicts of interest. I'm going to do this large loan with, I always say BHP, which is just, showing my Australian hat. But, I'm going to do this large loan or debt deal or private equity deal with BHP. I need to do some clearance of that. Who's going to work on that deal? Who's going to be on the wall crossed? Do we have any other conflicting deals we're doing with any of the parties to that transaction? And so we expanded our solution from being just employee compliance focused to also looking at deals and transactional conflicts of interest in the control room. And that's been combined with some other areas of vision where we're going. We've added some risk and compliance functionality as well to round out our solution. But our core business is really on those deal transactions as well as employee compliance.
No, it sounds like, given how incestuous certain Asian societies can be, Hong Kong, Singapore especially because of their smallness, but the stratified structure of many Asian societies, you'd have a market that's ripe, that's eager for such solutions if they choose to implement them. What's the draw of compliance? Obviously it was a job offer that lured you in, but what keeps you in it? What other than the pecuniary, yes, there are financial rewards. We all, to some extent, work for a paycheck, but beyond the remuneration, beyond the pecuniary, what are the rewards? What keeps you in it? What keeps you enthused and excited and want to continue to work in this field?
Yeah, it's interesting you say that. I mean, I work in sales, so you'd think remuneration would be my biggest driver, but I think as an individual, that's not my personal driver. I'm really driven by customer relationships, helping them improve their processes, and I think based on my career, that's probably makes sense, right? I came into IT audit and IT controls and improving people's processes through consulting time, and so for me, a driver.
You speak their language. You speak their language on a technical level.
Yeah, so that's what's kept me in it. Is I really love technology, and I love helping people improve their processes and get efficiencies and so forth. So what I really like about working with software like my compliance office is I'm delivering that, or my implementation team's delivering that, on a daily basis. They're coming up with new ideas to help solve people's problems within the compliance RegTech space. So that's one aspect. It's, day to day, I'm interacting with generally really friendly people within the compliance sector. Internally, at my current job, at my compliance office, we have a really fantastic culture despite working remotely everywhere. And so I really like, the teams that I work with to help build these products. But I guess, if I think about more the compliance sector itself, right, because I could go and work at another software firm that might be similar. I guess, I started in accounting, right? And that's a form of compliance. And, I went from there into internal audit, again, testing firms' controls and procedures. It's really part of, my nature now. And I just really didn't want to keep up with information security controls for the rest of my life. I definitely wasn't made, although it would be good money, to be an information security expert. Okay, I'll leave that to the experts. I will happily work on the controls, but the security aspect, it's too much for me.
That's not a regular job though either, because threats come in. Threats come in at all hours.
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But I guess what drove my passion into compliance itself was probably working at Thomson Reuters with the team at Thomson Reuters Regulatory Intelligence. I say that because, and that's like ex-Compnet for any oldies that are listening in.
It's they take very good care of their people.
Yeah, and well, it's more, that product produced, as you know, some really fantastic news and analysis on a daily basis about what the industry was experiencing, new regulatory changes, enforcements, and fines. And I'd say this industry is a little bit sexy in the number of enforcements that keep people, juiced up on, on compliance and what makes it exciting and cool. But, I really enjoyed reading that news every day and seeing what was changing in the industry rapidly, generally, sometimes slow. And so, yeah, I guess that kind of drew me into the compliance aspect more so than, say, audit or even operational risk, because there are lots of different stories that are happening in our market, which is interesting. And I didn't get drawn into the financial crime space. I would say there's a lot of sales teams and a lot of products out there in the market focused on anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing. And I didn't get drawn into that. Maybe I've always been difficult or wanting to be different. But I just found that I much preferred the areas of conduct risk from a compliance perspective. I think it's fascinating how the human psyche operates. You talked about in the beginning of the sentence about self-interest and remuneration. I think that's generally what rules the financial markets a lot of the time, is this greed and self-interest that causes poor behavior. And so whilst I feel like this area of compliance, this conduct risk, sees very low levels of major enforcement, significant fines, there's criminal,
at least lately, yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And so I think it's still a critical area of compliance, but perhaps a little bit neglected. We've spent a lot of the last 6 years talking about conduct risk, for sure, and what that means. but also a lot of time and money is spent investing in anti-money laundering and financial crime technologies without really doing that much to get to the bottom of the problem, right? So yeah, it's super interesting in my view. Yeah.
I think on a fundamental level now, I think even many institutions understand you've got your mainstream compliance, and then you've got the financial crime compliance team, and I think the two have, in a sense, parted ways over the course of the last decade because of the different nature and the specialization, more so of the latter. Yeah, I mean Thomson Reuters has been well poised. I mean, they got into compliance at a time when not too many people were focusing on it. And there's something to be said for the first mover advantage. We see that, I mean, with online sales and Amazon, for example. There's something to be said for the first mover advantage. But having said that, in that time, all kinds of competitors have cropped up. People with deeper pockets, more resources. I mean, if we're being fair, I mean, I love Thomson Reuters. I'll never say anything bad about them. But I'd have to say MLEX is giving them a run for their money because they've got deeper pockets. They're willing to pay more people. I mean, you know, there was an exec from the U.S. that came to Hong Kong once, and he was praising me and my editor, Tron, and he was like, these guys do the work of 10 men. And at the time, it was just me and Tron and Nate Nas and Witzka. And that was an exaggeration, but no, absolutely not. I mean, we were cranking out so much copy because we were a small unit. If one person slacks off, it's noticeable. So you didn't have that luxury. Yeah. You juxtapose that with the folks at Reuters News. They are so overstaffed. And in terms of there, you could turn in a story every 2 stories a week, or 1 story a week, or 1 story every 10 days.
Different kind of business.
Or 1 story, because they have no shortage of copy coming on a daily basis, whereas we're subscription based. People were paying a premium to read that high quality, analysis. And I mean, even though you could read about regulation in Reuters News, it's no boast to say what we did was about 2 inches wide and a mile deep. And that's what people were paying for. So yeah, there's still a market for deep analysis, deep intelligence.
I definitely think there is, that news and analysis content, and even just the regulatory change monitoring pieces is really key. And we're still seeing it in the market today. A keen interest for smaller firms these days in wanting to monitor regulatory change because they're entering new markets. These smaller emerging regions within the Asia Pacific region are slowly coming out of no regulation to some regulation. And so we're seeing, some trends of firms wanting to enter those markets and help bank and finance individuals in new territories. So news and analysis in this region is not going to go away. It's really needed.
So what do you, in terms of the challenges, the critical issues that you see afflicting compliance, both in the financial sector and multinational corporations writ large, both in APAC and globally, what are the trends? What are the patterns? What are the challenges, roadblocks that your clients are telling you about?
There's 3 key areas that I see spending, that are hogging a lot of compliance officers' time, or sorry, I should say more like industry chatter, perhaps. And I think those 3 areas are really, financial crime, crypto, and conduct risk. It couldn't be a podcast without mentioning crypto. So I'll get to that. So, from a financial crime perspective, obviously this is still dominating markets and the way that funds are washed through all of our financial institutions. And I think your podcast that you did first with Bill earlier on in this podcast series was super interesting, right?
That was our inaugural. That was our inaugural. Launch.
Great podcast. Just hearing about how easy it is to move funds through the banking system, in a sense, once they've been cleaned, from his original crimes, and I think there is so much money being spent on financial crime that is perhaps not justified. Just, taking a step back and looking at a risk-based approach to your anti-money laundering and counterterrorism controls, I think banks are potentially taking that too far in terms of the controls that they're operating and debanking certain individuals perhaps that shouldn't be, or making it very challenging to bank with them, which is causing essentially the secondary market for financial services, right? And so from my perspective, there needs to be a rethink both by regulators, enforcers, and the market in general about how much money a financial institution should be paying to implement AML controls when the identification at the end of the day of real financial crime is so limited. Now, I say that without being a huge player in this. I know that there's lots of suspicious activity reports that are generated, some more important than others. But again, you've got that output on the other end of investigating all of those. And I just think there is definitely this element of cover your ass, because the enforcement and the fines have been so significant in this space that we've had to implement all of these systems. So there has to be a better way. I think this is a really critical issue for the market. I know that there's some really interesting fintech regtechs that are actually really trying to map and unweave the financial crime spectrum and really try to solve that problem, as opposed to just some AML controls. They're really trying to find the criminals. And I think that's really interesting in this space. Niall wrote an article today just saying that the Casino Commission has given out $120 million fine to another casino in Aussie, not related to anti-money laundering, but related to gambling failures and control failures. And we're just still seeing that everywhere, that there's just these huge fines for operational control failures as well as anti-money laundering failures. And I think that's a really critical issue for our industry to solve, but it can't be sustainable. The cost and investment that's going in, it just can't be sustainable. That's number one. Yeah. And then I guess my second point was crypto. We've seen over the last couple of weeks the FTX situation, right? And many others. And I was recently at the Singapore FinTech Festival, and there were some really great sessions being done by like IOSCO and others around how they plan on trying to govern the crypto markets and implementing new regulation and controls, including the SEC and some great stuff that the New York regulator's doing. But honestly, I think this is coming back to that conduct risk space. The self-interest of all of these individuals investing in crypto to make a fast buck is just overwhelming. And, regulating that's going to be challenging. Is it going to be as exciting? Are people going to be able to make the same kind of money that they've been doing through the speculation of crypto markets? I don't know. And I just think this is a really super interesting area of regulatory compliance at the moment, is understanding how to manage the crypto markets that have spun around. It doesn't seem to be going away, although personally I think it should just disappear. I'm not a fan. That's due to my lack of knowledge.
Nor is Bill. And most Asians are not buying into it to the extent some people are. It's the bandwagon effect. It's that others are getting rich and we're getting left behind.
And that's the self-interest, and when the normal markets, right, are not necessarily doing so well because they reflect the actual economic situation, people want to get onto that. They want to make that quick money because, my Vanguard ETF is not doing as well as I'd hoped, or whatever, you know what I mean? So it is challenging, and we need to think about what that looks like from a compliance perspective. Where is compliance in these situations other than walking out the door?
Ken Ryjock, I'll send you the piece, but basically he said, what is the role of compliance officers in this space, and should they be doing jail time for some of their lapses? And more importantly, would any self-respecting, sensible person want to get into a compliance role at a crypto firm in this environment? Precisely because
it's too challenging. I mean, yeah,
And
You've got to earn your money somewhere, I guess.
he says this is someone who knows hardship, being a Vietnam vet and having done time in prison for money laundering.
Yeah.
So he probably knows more about hardship than the average person. Um, I mean, with fintech and regtech and what it means to legal and compliance professionals moving forward, I mean, what do you think they should know about the subject matter, given that many lawyers and accountants are not techies, or at least
I think that's
some have come
changing,
up to
right?
speed and got attained a certain degree of tech savviness, but most of them do not, barring those that go into the patent space. Most of them don't come from STEM backgrounds: science, technology, engineering, math.
Yeah, it's a very good point. So I guess, I'm unique. I came from an IT and accounting background. But also it's around how much capacity do you have in your role and how much investment you have in compliance within your organization. Because if I take implementing my solution as an example, some of our most successful implementations are where there is both a project team as well as a business team. And so the project team can really handle, the technical aspects and coordinating what the business requirements are, and can work with us on implementing that. They have to be closely connected, but these are generally a bit more successful, because our most unsuccessful implementations are when there is a single compliance officer who's trying to do their normal job as well as implementing some technology. And that is really challenging. You can't be expected to do your day job, your reporting, your controls testing, your regulatory reporting and requests all at the same time as trying to implement new technology. And so you do or should have buy-in from some form of your technology department to help you with this work. And because, particularly with implementing a solution like ours in the conduct risk, conflicts of interest space, it is going to touch every employee into your organization. And so it's really important that it is well tested, that there is some change management and training controls put in place before going live. So what should compliance officers know? I think they need to know what their strengths and weaknesses are in general, and have the ability to advocate internally for some help. If they do not have the skills, they do not have the resources within their team to move into an automated process, then they should be able to advocate for that within a business case to have some assistance to be successful. That would be my main point, I guess. But then, understanding technology and how it works, I think most people are reasonably tech savvy these days. They can pick things up, or, use some other, fresh resources, interns and graduates, etc., to help them with managing the system and the operational tasks that go with it going forward.
It is true that Gen Z and I think you and I are probably members of Gen X, but those that came after certainly tend to be a lot more tech savvy. Certainly when we were in school, computers were starting to roll out in the early 80s. But by the time, say, the millennials, the post-80s generation came of age, computers were already at an evolved state because they didn't have to deal with DOS. The graphical user interface was standard when they were growing up.
Yeah.
So coming back to your point about the business side and the project side, so would it be fair to say then that the project side, that's what goes on behind the scenes, whereas the business side are the ones that interact with the customer?
So I would say the business team in any implementation, they really need to understand their internal processes and procedures, right? That's really what a compliance officer should be good at. They should understand, these are our policies and procedures. They need to be able to make decisions about how those policies and procedures are implemented. And so they need to be involved throughout the process of the project. They can't just go and sit and do nothing, but because they need to be central to the decision-making processes. Otherwise, you'll get out the other end, something's implemented and it's not quite, what they expected. So they need to be involved in the project. They need to learn the technology from the beginning, get invested, in the outcomes that you would put in your business case, right? Your outcomes in your business case were to, move half a head count to being more efficient in doing X, Y, Z. They were to, make our staff be able to raise a pre-clearance request for trading, instantly within 30 seconds. Think about what those outcomes were and ensure that the project is driven towards those and you make quick decisions to do so. The project team is really about interacting with the vendor and the business to ensure that the project is completed on time, within budget, and within scope. And they should be, from a technical aspect, they might be handling things like integrations with your in-house systems, right? If you think about a control room implementation, there could be a large number of integrations with in-house solutions. They should be coordinating your resources internally to make sure that the project moves forward. And they might be assisting with things like, technically how you're implementing the system. So yeah, that's kind of the difference, I guess.
But in terms of the scope, isn't that where a lot of the disputes tend to arise because specs aren't specific enough?
For sure. And specifically in our area, if you're coming from no processes at all, no automated processes, that can be really challenging. You have to really work with your vendor and be guided by their we've got 1,200 customers globally. And so, we've got experience in implementing the system. Listen, as part of that process. Yeah.
I mean, part of, correct me if I'm wrong, but in terms of your point about compliance advocating that what it needs if it lacks the resources and the experience, I would equate that then as a corollary to escalating certain matters up the chain and saying, we're shorthanded, we need more funds. This comes up against the brick wall that I've noticed in this profession for over a decade, which was that even when times are good, it's hard to get the authorization to spend.
It's true, and even harder in the markets right now. I just had a great project for an organization, end of the year to implement some sort of moonlighting outside business activity, close relationship management software. And they had approval for the budget. The markets have kind of changed a little bit, and that budget got pulled even after they had made the decision to move ahead. And so that is the case in the market at the moment, that sometimes these things do fall through. So again, that's around this business case process, understanding what you might need and perhaps trying to get approval for slightly more than you need, right? Putting some buffer into that business case, but really, really understanding the benefits it's going to give you. Because if you don't understand the benefits, senior management and executive committees are not going to do it. Another really powerful thing is a lot of the boards and management teams are working at other organizations, and those other organizations might have implemented a system already, and they might be saying, well, why don't you? And so using the power of that as well, the community of your client base to help get these deals across the line. But, I think technology is helping compliance firms. It is traditionally a very paper-heavy organization. I'm speaking to organizations, very large firms that are managing personal account dealing completely manually. They are looking at restricted lists in spreadsheets that get sent around via email once a week that aren't updated, where a personal trade request is emailed, not recorded, that they have to manually reconcile statements of trading activity to the restricted list on a monthly basis. It is shockingly manual, and so many efficiencies and benefits can be gained from automating. That's what you need to provide the value to your management in moving away from this.
I remember having a conversation with my managing editor in London, Alex, and the crux of it was, look, we can all talk about fintech, but Thomson Reuters was the original fintech company, if you think about it, in terms of enabling farmers to transmit orders via telegram for bushels of wheat in the 19th century. So in any given in any given age, that people have availed themselves of the technology that they could. I mean, having the technology on offer doesn't necessarily mean you can afford it. We see countless consulting firms, the big four, saying, "Oh, you've got to avail yourself of data analytics and machine learning and AI." And yes, things are going in that direction. But there is a growing fear, it seems to me, amongst some junior to mid-tier compliance staff that there might be redundancies because of this. And going to what you were saying, a great deal is spent on compliance, perhaps too much. Are budgets too padded, or are they overstaffed, and will technology lead to job cuts?
Know if technology will lead to job cuts necessarily, because people are still always required to analyze, to report, and just to move away from literally the task of manually checking a PDF contract note to a pre-clearance request, right? We're moving away from that to focusing on things that are like the alerts that are generated, the risks and the conflicts that are identified. And so you're moving those people to roles that are better suited, that are, using their brains more. And we've seen that with some of our customers. We've definitely seen improvements of almost at least one headcount, and that was for a 400-person firm implementing a couple of modules. I don't think there's a risk of those people disappearing because technology has been implemented. There could be a risk because, if you're working in the financial crime space and you've hired a whole lot of people to go and do refreshes of your customer database and onboarding information, KYC, right? And you've done
junior MLROs, for example, doing low value added work.
Yeah, and I think that's a potential, but I don't think it's being driven based on implementing a new technology platform necessarily.
Because I mean, when you think back to the 50s and the 60s and the predictions, and you had certain dystopian predictions, and then you had the view that the future would be a utopia and technology would lead us there. And okay, the latter was a little too rosy, but the preponderance of the evidence tended to lean close to that in terms of technology making people's lives better. In the business world, though, I think you were kind of hinting at this. More people, more reports, you need more eyes to assess things. And that's exactly what happened. Word processing software made it possible to produce more reports. And then those reports needed to be looked at, which meant more man hours. And so...
Again, we've moved away from a report generation society as well, right? So, an alert-driven society is definitely better. From a financial crime perspective, perhaps that's still challenging because there's too many alerts. You have to really manage that. But I think we're moving away from, a daily, weekly, monthly report process and more to an alerts piece. So, yeah.
Do you think real-time monitoring is better? Or, I mean, because some say if you've got the processes in place, real-time monitoring, round-the-clock monitoring is better than periodic reviews.
I would say so, yes. Real-time monitoring is far more efficient. You're getting outcomes, identifying them faster. So yes, as soon as you can get information into a system, the better. You have to make sure that you have your parameters and your rules set up right, that you've tested that, right? You've tested the logic of how you've set up that monitoring and reporting. And look, if you feel very risk averse, then go and do some ad hoc monitoring as well, right? But first and foremost, you should be driven based off your real-time monitoring. I say that and it's expensive, right? Real-time monitoring can be. If I think about insider dealing and the big firms implementing transaction monitoring or trade surveillance solutions that are very, market surveillance, very complex transactions, it's very expensive on an ongoing basis to make sure that it's all operating effectively. Often with
certainly, in terms of what the world's major stock exchanges pay, for sure. to
Yeah,
keep
that's
tabs on their people. But those are some of the most surveilled organizations and buildings on earth. That you uh, do not think you can even pass a joint to someone. I mean, we have a program in compliance and regulation, as well as one in corporate and financial law, but both are highly regarded. Uh, but I guess from your perspective, I mean, you came into compliance with an accounting and IT background. The traditional view is, a law degree. You won't go wrong with a law degree. What what's the best way to prepare for a career in compliance or regulatory policy or you know
Yeah,
regulatory?
great question. So actually, when I moved to Hong Kong, I actually did one of the HKU certificates in.
That's right. Yeah, you told me about that. We were doing
Yeah, I did that at the
space HKU space.
spaces. Yes, HKU spaces, right? To understand the Hong Kong regulatory market. So I did that course when I joined, and there were a lot of individuals who were doing that potentially for making a move from one career to another, from another part of the business. And so I think, getting experience in some of those certificates that exist globally. So HKU has some, I think International Compliance Association, and there's a couple of others from governance, risk, and compliance space, because often those certificates post university as well give you some real life practical tips from people that have been working in the industry for a while. And so those sort of certificate based pieces are giving you practical guidance for post education. So I would definitely consider doing some of those certificates that can help you with the practical skills you need going into a role. And there's plenty of those from I know that HKU does those for sure. So and the fintech school and so on. I think they're fantastic. In terms of formal education, I think there's different roles within compliance that exist, right? So there's some that might join compliance from an accounting, financial crime perspective, right? They've worked a lot in investigations. There's individuals that have moved into compliance from economics and understanding the markets. You've got those that have worked in finance for a long time and transitioned because they didn't really find finance themselves, to be what they wanted, but working in compliance for the financial markets was interesting. There's so many different angles that can get you in the door into a compliance role. So yeah, I think definitely some of those certificates that are out there really help with practical skills to give you a step in the door. It's similar in internal audit, to be honest. We liked in internal audit to hire people that had worked in the business to move into internal audit because they understood the processes, right? They understood what was going on in that function, and so could come in and provide real practical experience from the business, whilst we could teach the controls and the risk-based approach, right?
Right.
And I think that was a really successful way of getting people in the door into internal audit, was through the business role that they previously had. So perhaps it is going and working as a banker in retail first, and then finding out if there's other jobs in that industry or experience that you can work with. So there's probably a lot of internship opportunities that should exist within the compliance sector that don't currently, that could really benefit. I'm not sure what programs there are for that, but certainly I would be thinking that universities should be focusing on getting some interns into the compliance sector as well. I think that could be quite useful.
Certainly, you bring up I think what you said goes to the issue of mentorship, and this is something a guest of ours brought up yesterday, that there isn't enough of it. Regarding all the credentials, I mean, ICA, CFE, ACAMS, all the rest of it. I mean, Should we equate that then with if someone's got that after their last name, you won't have to train them too much, or they at least understand the basics? I mean, what you as a prospective employer, if you saw someone with all the standard credentials after their last name, what would you be? That this person is at least conceptually sound. I can have a conversation with them.
I mean, you've always got to, no matter what role somebody's going into, you've got to balance that around not just credentials, but also experience, behavior, interaction, right? Compliance can be a very interactive role with the front line, with your first line, with business, right? So you need somebody who can have conversations, who can listen to those challenges. And so you need to be able to pick that out from a CV as well. You can't just be a whole list of credentials without any kind of person skills, I guess. So yeah, I mean, if I just saw lots and lots of certificates without like any kind of experience, I might be a little bit hesitant, but I would ask them lots of questions to help ease my reasons. Maybe they did just come out of university and they wanted to do some practical, certifications before doing so. But I feel like you get a lot of experience working on the job. You don't need to go chasing certificates if you've been working on the job all the time.
But here we come to the thing that, and the opinions differ. Some say there's a shortage of talent. Some say no. It's relative to what a lot of institutions are willing to pay. There's a shortage of talent. That if they raised recompense levels, more people would join the fray. So there's that debate out there. But assuming there's truth to the notion that there's a shortage of talent, people are equating those credentials as a proxy for experience. That, I mean, I don't want to pick on any one, GRC Institute. I don't want to pick on any one organization too much, but anecdotally, I from what I've seen in my own life and people that I know, no guarantee you'll get the job. Good chance you get good chance you'll get the interview, and for sure you'll get a call back. That there are certain credentials people expect to see on your CV. And in that situation, it's turning into a bit of an arms race. Add to that in this region, for example, the ACAMS exam, one guest yesterday was telling us that in certain parts of this region, certain people can't afford to take the ACAMS exam because that's more than their family makes in a month. I mean, but then again,
that's probably a fair comment. I mean, I looked at ACAMS specifically, actually, even though I'm not interested in financial crime. I just thought, maybe I should go and do it. Yeah. You have to do like a whole bunch of things first before you can even get to it. It was very confusing. I couldn't figure it out. So I did a sales course instead.
To hit the 40 credits that you need to sit for the exam. I mean, I think you've got enough in the way of professional experience to meet that number plus your accounting credential. But the compliance profession, then, it would seem to me, is very stratified. And but some would say, okay, these are rites of passage you have to go through. In the U.S., for example, after 3 years of law school, you have to pay a few $1,000s for a bar review course, and then you sit for the bar exam. Most people. Here at HKU, you don't just get your JD or your LLB and hang up a shingle and practice the next day. If you're going to be a solicitor, if you're going to be a barrister, there's a pupillage, and if you're going to be a solicitor, there's an apprenticeship, and you're a trainee for 2 years, and you have to take the PCLL. Your practice certificate. So there are rites of passage to be a member of the guild in any profession.
It's hard. You've got to find the right organization, the right people who will believe in you, perhaps pay for you to do those courses from your job, right? There's a responsibility as an organization that you work for to invest in their people from a trade perspective. And so if ACAMS is something that you desire as part of your performance, improvement within that organization, you should ask for it and see whether they can contribute, or it can be, paid for by the firm and taken out of your salary if that's the case that it needs to be, over time. You come up with a plan for education within your role in an organization, and people should value that, the education that you receive and training.
I know at TR, there were certain execs from the US who said to me, you ever thought about going back to the US and taking the bar exam? And I know in the Dubai office at TR, at one point they were talking about anyone who wanted to take the ACAMS exam, the company would sponsor them. I don't know if they followed through with that.
No, that happened. Yeah, it was done.
And it shows that your salespeople are willing to go to the effort to enhance their knowledge and learn the language and the terms and the concepts and the nomenclature of their clients, which, I think puts them in good stead. So, anything else you'd like to add before we close?
I think, as a final concluding comment, I'd just say compliance is a super interesting topic. It's incredibly broad. And, if you're interested in getting into regulatory compliance, then, reach out to peers that are in the industry that most likely would be willing to have a discussion about, entering the industry and what it looks like on the inside. And yeah, it's been really great to chat with you, Ajay. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And thank you to all of you watching and listening. Until next time, take care.